Started.
Hello, everyone. We're gonna give people a couple of minutes to join. So just hang in there for a few more minutes.
You're soft again. Maybe it's good if you put the microphone right next to you.
Okay. And then once Justin gets a
That sounds
chance
really
to
good,
talk
whatever
if
you
he
just
likes,
did.
then okay, perfect. And then are we able to allow participants to chat with us?
Yes, I have a button next to the attendees where I can click allow to talk. And
Perfect.
so if anybody wants to, I guess you can raise a hand and then we can do allow to talk when we get to the discussion part.
Okay, great. I see a couple of people have joined us.
Mhm. Yeah, maybe let's give it another minute or two to make sure everybody can join.
Okay.
I know when I haven't used Zoom for a while, it always has to update Zoom, and then it takes another 30 or 60 seconds to join the meeting. So we can give folks a second.
Perfect. More people are trickling in. Welcome,
Fabulous.
everyone. Okay, in respect of everyone's time, I'm going to begin. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Laura Diaz Villaquiran, and I'm a Senior Research Associate with the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance. And this is an initiative that we've started where we are sharing webinars of our map of the month. So every month we put out a map of the month that has um, a particular topic related to energy efficiency and transportation in our region. And this month's map of the month is on transportation costs and burdens across the Southeast. But before we do that, um, I want to talk about a little bit about SEEA. So again, we're the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance. We work across 12 states as well as the U.S. territories, the island territories, and we work in the Southeast. Our mission is to optimize the use and impact of energy to enhance the quality of life in the Southeast. And our vision is that all people in the Southeast live and work in healthy and resilient buildings, utilize clean and affordable transportation, and thrive in a robust and equitable economy. And then some of our core services are research, facilitation, consultation and education, and program management and financial services. So for this month's map, we utilize data from the Center for Neighborhood Technology, and they actually have created a housing and transportation affordability index. And they have metrics across the US that you can download to compare those affordability costs. We mapped transportation burden and annual vehicle miles traveled for the moderate income regional household in the Southeast, and we did mapping at both the census tract and the county level for this month. And then the way that CNT calculates this transportation burden is by accounting for auto use, auto ownership, and public transit use. So all of these metrics are used in a predictive model where they used over 16 data points to predict these costs and burdens. And then how transportation burden is defined across the US. So, transportation burden, people are considered to be households that are spending 15% or more of their annual income on transportation. And then for housing and transportation to be considered affordable in the US, households should not spend more than 30% of their income on housing and no more than 15% of their income on transportation. And so something that the US Bureau of Labor Statistics has found is that in 2024, across all the US, households are actually spending up to 50% of their income on both transportation and housing, which is above that threshold that we would expect. So we wanted to see what those transportation burdens look across a region so that we can better understand the challenges that people are facing in terms of transportation access and affordability. And so here are the results of that mapping. So one of the things that we see is that uh, the burden increases in a region uh, as you get away from major cities and small towns. So those burdens are pretty severe for people who are living in rural areas. And those are going to be the orange color. So the people who are in that orange color are actually spending 40% or more of their income on transportation costs. And then at the highest transportation burden are some people who are in Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana, Kentucky, and West Virginia. So that's where we see some of the highest burdens. And then we filtered here to show you where there are households that are spending up to 50% of their income on transportation costs. And again, this goes back to that model from CNT. And we also mapped where the major highways are. So some of these areas are far away from major nodes of transportation, but that is not the case for everyone, such as households like in this part of Alabama. There's a major highway going through, but they're still experiencing some pretty severe burdens. And then we also wanted to look at vehicle miles traveled to see how those compared to that transit burden. And so this is a result of that. So we identified where households are traveling up to 35,000 miles annually. And so some of those areas also are highlighted in the map, such as this part of Alabama and Mississippi. And so to go back to this map, we see that those burdens are highest in the Black Belt, so this part of the Southeast, also the Mississippi Delta region, and the Appalachian Mountains. And then so those metrics were showing you the census tract level burdens and vehicle miles traveled. And we also mapped those together at the county level. So when we map those together at the county level, we created a bivariate map that shows us the relationship between these two variables. And so the transportation burden here is going to be that pink hue. So areas that are in the whiter coloration, the lighter coloration, are not considered burdened. And then as you get to the pink color and then the deeper pink, the burden is higher. So across the Southeast, the majority of our counties are considered to be transportation burdened. And then those that are in the pink are in the severe category. And then for vehicle miles traveled is the same concept. So the lighter hue is less vehicle miles traveled. And then as you get closer to blue, you're going to get closer to that 35,000 miles traveled. So when both of those are high in the map, it's going to be showing this kind of deep blue purple color. And so again, we see that the black belt has some high transportation burdens, and then those households are also traveling more, are driving more to get around. So to get to core services, such as trying to get access groceries, potentially also trying to access work and getting to access medical services. So those people are having to travel farther, and that's going to be accounting for their expenses. And then, Dr. Amy, do you want to share a little bit about what this graph is showing us?
Sure. Happy to talk about this one. So we were interested in when we saw the map that showed that the urban areas had lower transportation burden in general, and we were wondering what the relationship was between the transportation burden and the vehicle miles that were traveled. And sometimes I think when we look at data, one of the most interesting things is not what the data is showing, but what the data isn't showing. And I think that's what this graph is illuminating. So these are all the jurisdictions across the southeastern SEEA territories, vehicle miles traveled on the vertical axis and transportation on the horizontal, transportation burden in percentage of income on the horizontal axis. And so what you see is, first of all, that with that 15% threshold, most of these jurisdictions, these are for moderate and low income. So at the 80% of the area median income households. So for those households, the majority of those jurisdictions are considered transportation burdened. And you can see, because the cloud kind of goes up and to the right, that the higher the transportation burden, the higher the vehicle miles traveled, or the higher the vehicle miles traveled, the higher the transportation burden. So we don't see any households that are experiencing a high, really high transportation burden that are not driving more than 15,000 miles a year, which would be considered kind of an average mileage. So this is just to show that generally speaking, if people are experiencing a transportation burden, it's correlated with high miles.
Thank you. That was super helpful.
Sure.
So now we're going to get into the discussion to sort of reiterate what are the themes that we found, how this relates to the economy and the economic trends that we are seeing in terms of transportation. And then towards the end, we would love to get feedback from the audience. So please ask questions and share any thoughts that you have in terms of these maps, as well as any other ways that we could be visualizing this for your local geographies. I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Amy again to talk a little bit about the trends.
Sure. So the other question is, what was adding to the transportation burden? And we all know that a lot of economic situations changed in 2020 associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. One of them was the cost of vehicles. So the line above in the darker color is showing the consumer price index for vehicles, used and new vehicles, over time. And so something at 100% would be keyed to the standard of living or the cost of living. And you can see that there was a jump in around 2020 when vehicle costs went up. There's also, we don't have the graph of this one, but there was also a jump in insurance costs around that time. And then correlated with that, and also just to show the challenges that families are having when they are having to drive a lot of miles, they're having to fuel their car more frequently. The lower graph in the lighter color blue on the right-hand axis is showing the regular gas price per gallon. So you can see that it has really jumped up and been very volatile. Sometimes it's high and sometimes it's lower. And of course, right now we're in a time when it has increased rapidly. So this is also adding to the burden for families that are cash strapped and making the cost of fuel add to the cost of insurance and the cost of owning the car. These are all things that add to the transportation burden.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yes, so then again, to just reiterate what we're seeing in terms of the data and our maps, travel burdens are concentrated in rural geographies, which amplifies disparities for marginalized communities. And we see that the most transportation efficient locations are situated in urban areas and small towns. So this model again accounted for public transit. So the built environment also plays a big role in people's ability to access services, to get around. So having sidewalks, having public transportation, having educational facilities, work nearby, grocery stores, hospitals. And so small towns and urban areas tend to have more services that are available nearby for folks, and then more options on how to get around. And then some studies have found some of the similar trends that this data is showing. So, relative to urban context, rural communities have less connected pedestrian, biking, and transit infrastructure, longer distances between destinations, and higher car dependency, which leads to higher transportation costs. And something else that plays into those burdens is that we see higher poverty rates in rural geographies. And then that is all for my piece. So thank you all for taking the time to meet with us today. And now we can open it up for discussion. So if you have questions or if this brings up any thoughts about where you are or how we could address these challenges, I would love to hear from the audience. So I'm going to stop sharing screen so that we can make it a little bit more interactive.
So feel free either to drop a question in the chat if you'd like us to answer it verbally, or if you would like to ask your question, raise your hand and then we will allow you to unmute and speak directly. We'd love
Um,
to hear what your thoughts are. Oh, good. Thank you,
I
Will.
see that Will has added a question in the chat, and I'm going to have Justin answer first. Justin, can you introduce yourself and talk to us about what do you see as a promising policy or what do you see as promising policy or program solutions to address high transportation burdens?
Yeah, sure. So good morning, everyone. I'm Justin Brightheart, a senior program manager at SEEA, and I work on our energy efficient transportation work. So, first off, thanks to the research team for their work on this. Um, I would say a promising policy and program solution. It's a little bit of it's kind of a little bit of all of the above. I mean,
Mm.
that kind of sounds like a non-answer, but genuinely, I think if we make sure that programs and policies are investing in multimodal transportation, so yes, investing into, I would say vehicle electrification, I would say into public transit, sidewalks, kind of providing people with more transportation options so they can kind of decide what works best for them uh, is the best way to go. And I'll kind of add this kind of this thought out to everyone is that transportation can be very expensive and it's a very needed thing. I mean, I would encourage folks in the audience to kind of think about how did you get to work today? And even if you didn't and you work from home, like that's a form of transportation. And how the people in your life get to where they need to go, as Laura mentioned, like whether it's education, medical services, food. That's very important. And as we see our transportation system as the fuel and the as we're energy is kind of becoming more in the forefront, and as we're seeing transportation diversify in the fueling source, and as electrification happens, being more connected to our built environment, so that plays a role. And so, and how can we make sure that transportation, like thinking about the cost of these things. I mean, how many of us have driven a car, the check engine light comes on and I don't know, it's the transmission. Please don't let it be the catalytic converter. Like there's so many things that kind of come to mind that you kind of ignore until you see it. And then I've been guilty of it. I drive with the check engine light until I absolutely had to. Sometimes it's going off. And I'm just like, whoo. Um, But I would encourage y'all to think about as you get into this discussion, kind of think about those aspects and how connected and how connected our lives are to transportation, whether directly or indirectly.
Something that we have been working on. So we're part of an initiative called Towards Equitable Electric Mobility, where we're supporting both the state of Virginia and North Carolina in uplifting their electrification policies. And one of the takeaways in terms of the volatility of gas prices is that, gas prices can spike and also drop, but those spikes can really make a difference in terms of people being able to get around. So, a lot of people have been turning to buying electric vehicles because the price of electricity is much more stable and it's more affordable. And there are a lot more options on the market now to where buying a used TV is an option for people. So we have seen that in the recent months with the spikes on the gasoline prices, people are considering buying an electric vehicle. I know that's not an option for everyone, but that is one of the alternatives that we have. And then the concept of a 15-minute city is also something that is interesting in terms of planning. So I think designing areas that are more connected and that provide services for more people. One of the big barriers for rural communities is access to medical care. And so we see that people who are in rural areas are less likely to access routine medical care because they're so far away from hospitals. So perhaps investing in programs that get people to and from medical services. I know that in Atlanta, there was once a pilot where with Uber for 15 extra miles. So maybe I'm wrong about the miles. It was the first and last mile. So there was a program with MARTA where Uber and MARTA partnered to get people to locations that were not serviced by the MARTA line. So Uber would pick up passengers at those endpoints of the MARTA transit station and then get them to where they need to go. And it was a pretty successful program in making sure that people got to areas that otherwise they couldn't because of MARTA, the segmentation and the distance from and to where they need to go. So perhaps some model where people are taken to hospitals or clinics, either by, services like Uber or, other types of services like this, like Lyft, or, having more public transit is another option. So in these geographies where we're seeing less burden, they're likely to have public transit. And so, yeah, making sure that there's public transit accessible to people is going to lower their transportation burdens. Amy, I see that you posted something in the chat.
I'm just trying to encourage interaction, referring people to the Q&A if you prefer, and just wanting to say it doesn't have to be a question. Contributions are welcome, thoughts are welcome. We would just like to engage with our participants and see what your thoughts are about this data.
Yeah, like I said earlier, we're trying this out, something new. Um, so we're seeing, how how engagement we want to engage more in terms of our data visualizations. And then if you have ideas for how um we could we could provide this data at a more granular level, so we could zoom into specific geographies, or if there are other data points that you would like to see in future map of the months, we encourage you to reach out to us. Justin just dropped a resource in the chat. I know we also put together a resource with information from this map.
Yeah, we have a handout with some links. I'll be honest, I can't figure out how to attach it in the chat, so we'll send it as a follow-up email to everybody who registered for the webinar.
If I can add the National Rural Transit Assistance program is a DOT program, kind of built as a space for rural transit organizations to engage, and it really varies by state, but it usually falls under the state who administers a lot of this.
Mhm.
But so I'm sure there are some. I know there are agencies in every southeastern state. I'm not familiar with all of them off the top of my head right now, but highly recommend it. But one aspect I will also highlight, like of real impact, is the the closure of rural hospitals, um, which I know at least in Georgia it's happened quite a bit. And actually, if you remember the map that Laura was showing with the transportation burden, with like almost 80, was like 61 to 83%. Those communities actually saw their hospital close. Um, and so with that, that means they now have to drive either to Columbus, Georgia, or even Macon, Georgia. Out even that even extends out to where people might have to drive to Athens or Atlanta, and I'm sure that could even be said in other states. But where those when that happens, it shifts the transportation patterns of people. Even if a grocery store closes, if that shifts where people now can go to get food. And so as we think about vehicle electrification, which could really be a real solution, because electric vehicles, their total cost of ownership is less. Just you're not using gas. As Laura mentioned, stable electricity prices and vehicle maintenance is usually a lot less. There's less moving parts. It could make a difference. But as we, and I think from a SEEA standpoint, as we look at vehicle electrification across the Southeast, we want to make sure that um, it's trying to prioritize the transportation needs of people,
Mhm.
and pushing and then seeing how vehicle electrification can support that. And it may not, like, that's why we talked about, like, that's why I mentioned earlier, the multimodal transportation, pulling all levers of transportation to meet our needs. But kind of keeping that caveat in mind that these are real issues. And, even though our cars sit for like 90%, at least 90% of the day, they're really critical in our lives and can really be the difference in life and death for a lot of people. So as we are thinking about electrification, mobility, those types of things, thinking about how we can support folks meeting their needs within their community, um, as like as um, the primary focus, and then electrification and all that kind of as the secondary,
Mhm.
supporting that.
That's a really important point, Justin. Thank you. Um, so for attendees, Amy posed a question. Were there any elements of this data that surprised you? Have we received any messages in
I
the chat?
think that our attendees are shy.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. Can you speak to why you think burden is highest in these communities? Since you have the roads one up right there, I was really struck by this one where the pockets of the highest transportation burden over 50% tended to be really far from roads, or even if they were near a road, they were far from a city. Um, I think it really shows the difference between access to infrastructure, car dependence, and those kinds of services. Laura, can you go to the last slide that's behind the thank you slide?
Yeah.
Since you asked the question about the transportation burden, the one that compares Virginia and Mississippi.
Oh, is it in here? Do you,
I think so. Oh, it might not be there. I
no.
can.
You know what? This is my desktop, but do you want to
No,
share the
that's okay.
screen?
I'll share. I've got it over here. I
Perfect.
think
Thank
I
you.
can share it from here. At least I think I can. Yeah. Um, does that work?
I'm not seeing it in this moment. Do other folks see it?
Okay, let me try share.
No. Yeah, now it's loading.
Okay. I don't
Perfect.
know what you're seeing, but hopefully you can see that
Yeah.
there's two point clouds here. One is for Virginia, in which there is a lot of transportation infrastructure. There was a lower transportation burden in general, and those points are in the lighter blue color. In the darker red color, there's the same point cloud for Mississippi, and you can see that it's all shifted to higher transportation burden, to higher vehicle miles traveled, and it really speaks to the existence of the higher transportation burdens in places like Mississippi, where the infrastructure for transportation is less accessible to the rural populations. And also, there's a higher poverty level, there's a higher level of energy burdens and other burdens in Mississippi as well, and also a higher population of marginalized populations, people of color, and other such identities that tend to have a higher correlation with poverty and economic challenges. So I thought this was an interesting comparison because you could see immediately the difference between a car dependent infrastructure, and that you could really see that though that cloud was for the whole Southeast, not all states are the same. Some states are further down on transportation burden and further down in vehicle miles traveled. Some are higher in both.
Um, Justin Romeo said, "Thank you for featuring CNT's work. You will hit on some of the key things we see in the data nationwide and would love to hear more about the questions you all are seeing with the data and how it can be useful to your work." That's awesome. Yeah,
Thank
just
you, Justin.
to add to what Will, or to add to what you were saying, I think that economic opportunity of being connected. So it can, like cities, are nodes where the transportation burden is lower, and I think that it's translating to economic opportunity, but as well as having different options of getting around. And then poverty is connected. So in the Mississippi Delta, we also see high energy burdens, and higher poverty rates. So that to some extent it's correlated to less economic opportunity where people are most burdened. Um, but I think that if we don't have any more questions from the audience, we can end early. Thank you, everyone. Thank you all for participating and joining us.
Thank you. And we'll be aiming to do this on the last Thursday of every month. So stay tuned for next month's data.
Bye. Thank you.